On a quiet Thursday evening in late May, a 64-year-old man named Walter Hayes walked into the Redfield County office and took a seat in the back row, his hands resting calmly on his knees. He already knew why he'd been called. The notice had come 2 weeks earlier, a formal complaint. Unsightly accumulation of tools, scrap, and mechanical debris. In simple terms, they wanted his tool shed gone. Walter had seen it coming. He'd heard the comments for years, at the gas station, at the hardware store, even from people who'd never stepped foot inside his property. They called it a mess, a fire hazard, a pile of useless junk. One man had even laughed and said, "That place looks like a scrapyard from the 70s. What none of them understood, what none of them had ever bothered to ask, was why Walter Hayes had spent over 40 years filling that shed. To them, it was clutter. To him, it was something else entirely. But Walter didn't come to argue. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't defend himself. When they finally called his name and told him he had 14 days to clear it all out, Walter simply nodded once, stood up, and walked out without saying a word. And behind him, a room full of people quietly believed they had just solved a problem. They had no idea. They had just removed the only thing that was about to save them.
If you enjoy stories where quiet people prove everyone wrong without raising their voice, make sure to subscribe. And as you watch this unfold, ask yourself one thing. What would you have done in his place? Before you can understand why that meeting mattered, you need to understand Walter Hayes. Walter wasn't a loud man. He wasn't the kind who argued, complained, or tried to prove himself to anyone. For nearly 4 decades, he'd lived on the same piece of land just outside Redfield County, working as a small-scale mechanic, fixing whatever people brought to him. Tractors, generators, water pumps, old engines that most folks would have hauled straight to the dump. Walter didn't believe in throwing things away. That habit came from his father. Back in 1968, when Walter was still a teenager, his father had told him something he never forgot. They'd been standing in a dim workshop, surrounded by tools most people would have called worn out. "Never throw away a working tool," his father said. "Even if nobody needs it today, someday they will." Walter took that seriously. Every broken machine that came through his hands, he didn't just fix it. He studied it, took it apart, kept what still worked. A belt that was slightly worn, a bearing that still turned smooth, a fitting that didn't match anything yet. Piece by piece, year after year, he built something inside that tool shed. From the outside, it looked like chaos. Shelves packed tight with metal parts, wooden crates filled with old tools, hooks holding things no one could name anymore. But to Walter, it wasn't a mess. It was a system. Every shelf had a purpose. Every box had a memory. Every tool had a future use, even if that future hadn't arrived yet. The problem was, no one else saw it that way. To the newer generation in Redfield County, people who ordered everything fresh from dealers and replaced instead of repaired, Walter Hayes didn't look prepared. He looked outdated. And that tool shed looked like something the town had outgrown. The meeting itself was held in a low-ceilinged room on the second floor of the Redfield County building, the kind of place that always smelled faintly of paper, dust, and floor polish. By the time Walter arrived, most of the chairs were already filled. Farmers, business owners, a few town officials. And sitting near the front was the man who had started all of it. Ethan Cole. Ethan wasn't a farmer in the traditional sense. He ran a large operation just outside town, modern equipment, leased land, everything optimized for efficiency. People respected him. Some even admired him. He stood up when his name was called, holding a thin stack of printed photos. "Thank you," he said, calm and confident. Then he turned one of the photos toward the room. It was Walter's tool shed. Doors open, tools hanging, parts stacked, metal pieces scattered across shelves and crates. A quiet murmur moved through the crowd. Ethan flipped to the next photo. "This is the interior," he said. As you can see, there's no clear organization, no safe storage, and no reason for half of this to still be here. A few people nodded. Someone in the middle rows let out a short laugh. Ethan didn't smile, but he didn't stop it either. This isn't just about appearance, he continued. It's about safety, liability, and frankly, it sends the wrong message about how we operate as a community. He paused, then added, "We're trying to move forward, not hold on to things that should have been cleared out years ago." More nods, more agreement. Finally, the chairman looked toward the back. "Walter, would you like to respond?" Every head turned. Walter sat still for a moment. Then he stood up slowly, adjusted his jacket, and looked toward the front of the room. For a second, it seemed like he might say something, but then he shook his head lightly. "No, sir," he said. "I believe I've heard enough." And just like that, he turned, walked down the aisle, and left the room. Behind him, the decision was already being made.
The notice was posted the very next morning. A bright orange sheet stapled to a wooden post at the edge of Walter Hayes' property. 14 days to comply. Anyone driving past could see it, and plenty of people did. Some slowed down just enough to read it. Some didn't bother stopping. They already knew what it meant. By noon, the whole town was talking about it. At the gas station, someone said, "About time, if you ask me." At the diner, another replied, "He's had that mess sitting there for years." No one said it loudly, but no one defended him either. Walter, meanwhile, went about his day like nothing had changed. He opened the shed just after sunrise, same as always. The doors creaked the way they always had. The light filtered in across shelves stacked with decades of work. He picked up a worn socket set, cleaned it, placed it back exactly where it belonged, then moved on to the next thing. There was no rush in his movements, no sign of panic, just routine. Later that afternoon, a man named Carter drove up in an old pickup. "You heard about the notice?" Carter asked, leaning out the window. Walter nodded once. Carter looked toward the shed, then back at him. "If you're clearing it out, I could take some of that scrap off your hands, save you the trouble." Walter didn't answer right away. He just looked at the shed for a moment, then said quietly, "I'm not sure it's scrap." Carter gave a small chuckle. "Well, town seems to think it is." Walter didn't respond. Carter drove off a minute later, shaking his head. That was the pattern for the next few days. People stopped by, not to help, but to take. Offers came in low. Scrap prices, bulk deals, whatever you can't move in time. To them, it was simple. 14 days meant one thing. Everything inside that shed was about to lose its value. But what they didn't understand, what none of them could see yet, was that inside those walls were things you couldn't just replace overnight. Belts that weren't made anymore, fittings that didn't match modern sizes, tools that had been modified by hand for problems that didn't have standard solutions, and Walter Hayes knew exactly where every one of them was. The town saw a countdown. Walter saw something else. He saw time running out, not for himself, but for everyone else.
By the 5th day, something small started to shift. At first, no one called it a problem, just delays. A delivery that didn't show up on time, a part that was still on the way, a shipment that had been pushed back a few days. It wasn't unusual. Not yet. The Redfield equipment dealer, the only full-service supplier within 60 miles, had always been reliable. If you needed a belt, a bearing, a hose, they either had it or they could get it within a day or two. That's how the town worked now. You didn't keep extras. You didn't repair what you could replace. You ordered what you needed when you needed it. And it always came. Until it didn't. By day 7, the tone had changed. A farmer named Lewis walked into the dealer asking for a standard drive belt, something simple, something they always had. They didn't. "Next shipment's delayed," the clerk told him. "Should be here by the end of the week." Lewis frowned. "That's 5 days." The clerk just shrugged. By the next morning, it wasn't just belts. Filters were out, hydraulic hoses were back-ordered. Even basic fittings, things that used to sit in bins by the dozen, were suddenly gone. Still, people weren't worried. Not really. They adjusted, waited, worked around it. Except for Ethan Cole, because Ethan's operation didn't run on waiting. It ran on precision, tight schedules, high-output machinery, every piece of equipment timed down to the hour. And on the 8th day, one of those machines stopped. It wasn't anything dramatic. No explosion, no smoke, just a sudden grinding halt in the middle of a routine job. The kind of failure that should have been easy to fix. A single component, small, replaceable, ordinary. Ethan made the call immediately. "Yep, I need that part today," he said, pacing beside the machine. There was a pause on the other end. Then, "We don't have it." Ethan stopped walking. "What do you mean you don't have it?" "It's back-ordered. We're waiting on delivery." "How long?" Another pause. "We don't have a date." Ethan lowered the phone slowly. Around him, everything was quiet. A machine that should have been running wasn't. A job that should have been done wasn't. And for the first time in years, something simple, something basic, wasn't available when he needed it. Across town, the delays were stacking up. Small problems, manageable problems. But together, they were starting to look like something else. And the one place in Redfield County that held answers was still sitting under a bright orange notice, counting down the days. On the 9th night, long after the road outside had gone quiet, Walter Hayes was still inside the shed. A single overhead bulb cast a dim yellow light across the shelves. The place looked the same as it always had. Rows of tools, stacks of parts, boxes labeled in handwriting that had faded over the years. Walter moved slowly through the space, not searching for anything, just looking. His hand brushed across a row of old wrenches, then paused on a small wooden crate near the back wall. He opened it. Inside were smaller pieces, fittings, connectors, odd-shaped parts that didn't seem to match anything. Most people would have thrown them out years ago. Walter didn't. He picked one up, turned it over in his fingers, then set it back exactly where it belonged. For a moment, he just stood there, quiet. Then, almost like a memory surfacing, he heard his father's voice again, clear as it had been all those years ago. "The day you can't get what you need, you'll wish you kept it." Walter let out a slow breath. He looked around the shed, not with pride, not even with satisfaction, just with understanding. Out there, people were starting to feel something shift. Things weren't as easy as they used to be, not as available, not as certain. He had seen it before. Different year, different reason, same pattern. Systems worked until they didn't, and when they stopped working, people went back to whatever still did. Walter reached up, turned off the light, and stepped outside into the dark. Behind him, the shed stood silent, still full, still waiting. And for the first time since that notice had been posted, it wasn't the shed that felt out of place. It was everything else. By the 11th day, it looked like things might settle down. The dealer reopened, just like that. A paper sign that had hung on the glass door for nearly 2 days, closed until further notice, was gone. In its place, a smaller note. Limited inventory available. More shipments expected soon. That was enough. For most people, it felt like the problem had passed. A few trucks had come in overnight, some shelves were restocked, orders were being processed again. At the diner that morning, the tone had shifted. "Just a delay," someone said. "A supply hiccup," another added. "Happens every now and then." Relief moved through the town, quiet but certain. Even Ethan Cole seemed to ease. He got one of his smaller machines back up and running with a temporary fix, just enough to keep things moving. Not perfect, but manageable. And for the first time since the delays had started, people stopped worrying, which meant they also stopped looking. Back at Walter's place, the countdown hadn't stopped. 3 days left. That orange notice still hung at the edge of his property, bright as ever. And that afternoon, for the first time since it had been posted, Walter did something different. He started moving things. Not fast, not carelessly, but deliberately. A crate shifted from one shelf to another. A row of tools reorganized. A small clearing made near the entrance. From the road, it looked like progress, like compliance, like a man finally giving in. A passing driver slowed down, glanced at the shed, then nodded slightly to himself. "About time," he muttered. And just like that, it seemed like the story was heading toward a quiet ending. The town would get what it wanted, the shed would be cleared, and whatever had almost gone wrong would be forgotten. But the truth was, nothing had actually been fixed. It had only paused. The next morning, the doors were closed again. This time, there was no new sign, no explanation, just locked glass and an empty parking lot. By noon, a small group had gathered outside the Redfield equipment dealer. People stood there longer than they needed to, hoping someone would come out, say something, give a timeline. No one did. Phones started ringing. Calls went unanswered. Then finally, sometime after lunch, word began to spread. Not officially, just from one person to another. A shipment had been delayed, then another, then another. The supplier hadn't just slowed down, it had stopped. Inside the store, what little inventory had arrived the night before was already gone, sold within hours. Whatever came next wasn't coming anytime soon. Across town, engines sat unfinished, jobs paused mid-task, fields half-worked, repairs left open. And for the first time, people didn't just feel inconvenience, they felt uncertainty. Because this time, there was no backup plan, no second dealer, no alternate supply. Just one place that had always been there, now completely out of reach. And slowly, quietly, a realization began to form. The system they had trusted wasn't as reliable as they thought, and the one thing they had pushed aside might have been the only thing left. By the 12th day, the tone in Redfield County had changed completely. This time, there were no assumptions. No one was saying, "It'll be fine," because it wasn't. The dealer was still closed, phones still unanswered, orders still stuck somewhere no one could reach, and now machines were starting to fail. Not all at once, but enough. A baler that wouldn't start, a pump that lost pressure, a tractor that shut down mid-job and refused to come back. Each problem small on its own, but together they were beginning to stop everything. And that's when Ethan Cole's main unit went down. It happened just after sunrise. No warning, no buildup. One moment it was running, the next it wasn't. Ethan shut it down immediately and checked the system. It didn't take long to find the issue. A coupling inside the drive assembly had worn out. Not a major failure, not something that should have been a big deal. Under normal conditions, it would have been a 1-hour fix. He made the call anyway, out of habit, out of hope. Same result. No answer. He tried another number, then another. Nothing. Ethan stood there for a long moment, staring at a machine that had cost more than most houses in the county, completely useless because of one small part. Around him, the rest of his operation slowed. Workers waited. Equipment idled. Time passed. And with every minute, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not frustration, not anger. Helplessness. Because for the first time, he didn't have control. By midday, he had run through every option, called every contact, checked every nearby supplier, even considered driving 2 counties over just to see if someone might have what he needed. No one did. And that's when the thought finally settled in. Quiet. Unavoidable. There was only one place left. Ethan didn't say it out loud. He didn't need to. He just grabbed his keys, got into his truck, and started driving.
The road to Walter Hayes' property felt longer than usual, not because of distance, but because of everything that had happened between them. The meeting, the photos, the laughter, the words he couldn't take back. When he pulled into the driveway, he didn't get out right away. He sat there for a moment, looking at the shed. Same as always. Doors open, shadows inside. From a distance, it still looked like nothing had changed, but now he wasn't seeing the same thing. He wasn't seeing clutter. He wasn't seeing junk. He was seeing possibility. Ethan stepped out of the truck. Walter was already there, standing near the entrance like he had been expecting him. Neither of them spoke at first, just the sound of wind moving across the open land. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "I've got a machine down," he said. Walter nodded once. "I figured. It's a coupling, drive assembly, worn out." Walter took a slow breath, then asked, "What size?" Ethan explained. Dimensions, fit, type. Walter listened carefully, then looked past him, toward the shed. "That's not something they keep in stock anymore," he said. "I know." Another pause. Then Walter added quietly, "You've got 2 days left on my deadline." The words landed heavier than Ethan expected. He nodded. "I know that too." There was no point pretending, no point defending anything, so he didn't. Instead, he said the only thing left to say. "I was wrong." Walter didn't respond. "I thought I understood what I was looking at. I didn't." He glanced toward the shed, then back at Walter. "I need your help." For a moment, nothing moved. No reaction, no expression, just silence. Then Walter turned and walked inside. "Come on," he said. Ethan followed, and for the first time, he stepped into the place he had tried to erase. Inside, the air felt different, cooler, still. Shelves stretched along the walls, packed with tools, parts, pieces of things that didn't make sense at first glance. But as Walter moved through it, none of it looked random. He didn't search. He didn't hesitate. He just walked, turned, reached, and stopped at a section near the back. Without a word, he pulled down a small metal piece from a labeled hook, then another, then a third. He laid them out on a worn wooden bench. Not exact, but close enough. Ethan stared at the parts. "How do you know that'll work?" Walter picked one up, turned it slightly, adjusted a small edge with a tool lying nearby. "I've seen this before. Different machine, same problem." He looked up briefly. "Give me an hour." And just like that, the thing everyone had dismissed, the place they had tried to shut down, became the only place that could keep everything moving.
Word didn't spread all at once. It moved the way things always did in Redfield County, quietly at first. One person told another, a phone call here, a short conversation there. By the end of that afternoon, people knew. Ethan Cole's machine was back up and running, not with a dealer part, not with something ordered, with something from Walter Hayes' shed. At first, most didn't believe it. Then Carter drove past Ethan's field and saw it himself. The machine was moving again, steady, smooth. No sign that anything had ever been wrong. That was enough. The next morning, the first truck pulled into Walter's driveway. Then another, then another. No announcements, no invitations, just people showing up. Some came with broken parts in the back of their trucks. Others came with nothing but a description of what had failed. A hose that didn't match modern fittings. A gear that had worn down after years of use. A bracket that had cracked in a place no one expected. Problems that normally had one solution: call the dealer, wait for the part. But now, that option was gone. Walter didn't rush. He didn't try to handle everything at once. He just worked the way he always had. One person at a time, one problem at a time. Inside the shed, the same space that had been called a hazard just days earlier, something else was happening. Walter would listen,
ask a few questions, then turn and walk into the maze of shelves. No hesitation, no guessing, just quiet certainty. He'd reach into a bin, pull something out, hold it up to the light. Sometimes it was an exact match, sometimes it wasn't. When it wasn't, he adjusted it, filed an edge, modified a fitting, combined two pieces into something new, and every time, it worked. By midday, there were 5 trucks waiting. By evening, there were 10. No one laughed anymore. No one made comments about junk. They stood quietly, watching, waiting their turn. Even the ones who had spoken the loudest at that meeting, even the ones who had nodded when the photos were shown. They didn't mention it. They didn't have to. The shift was obvious. From the road, Walter's property looked the same shed, the same shelves, the same pieces stacked in the same places. But the meaning had changed, completely. What had looked like clutter now looked like inventory. What had been called useless now felt essential. And standing in the middle of it all was Walter Hayes, moving calmly from one task to the next. No speeches, no reminders, no "I told you so," just work. Late that afternoon, Ethan returned, not with a problem, with a piece of paper. He waited until Walter finished helping a man from the next county, then stepped forward. "I went back to the county office," he said. Walter didn't look up. "Did you?" Ethan held the paper out. "It's a petition." That got Walter's attention. He wiped his hands on a cloth, then took it. Names filled the page, and the next, and the next. Dozens of them. Farmers, operators, people who had been there that morning, and the day before, and the day before that. People who had seen the shed, not from the outside, but from within. "What's it say?" Walter asked. Ethan answered simply, that the shed stays. Walter looked down at the signatures again, then back toward the line of trucks waiting outside. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he folded the paper once and set it on the workbench beside him. Outside, another truck pulled into the driveway, another problem, another person, and inside that shed, the place they had tried to shut down, kept everything moving. The 14th day arrived without announcement. No reminder, no warning. Just another morning, like the ones before it. Except this time, everyone knew what it meant. That orange notice was still there at the edge of Walter Hayes' property, faded slightly from the sun, but still readable. 14 days to comply. By mid-morning, the trucks had already started lining up again. Not as many as the day before, but enough. Enough to remind anyone passing by that something important was happening here. Inside the shed, Walter worked like always. Steady, focused, unbothered by the date. Around 10 o'clock, a county vehicle turned onto the road. White truck, official markings. It slowed as it approached, then pulled into the driveway. Conversation stopped. Tools paused mid-air. Even the men waiting outside turned to look. The door opened, and 2 officials stepped out. One of them was the same inspector who had posted the notice 2 weeks earlier. The other was from the county board. They walked toward the shed. Walter didn't move to meet them. He finished tightening a bolt, stepped back, checked his work, then turned. "You hear about the notice?" he asked. The inspector nodded. "Today's the deadline." Walter glanced past them toward the line of trucks, then back at the shed. "Looks like I've been a little busy." The inspector followed his gaze. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then the second official spoke. "We've reviewed the situation." Walter waited. No reaction, no expectation, just silence. The official took a breath. "Given the current circumstances and the number of operations depending on this location," he paused, choosing his words carefully. "We're withdrawing the order." No one spoke, not right away. It took a second for the words to settle, then another. Outside, someone shifted their weight. Another man let out a quiet breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The inspector reached up, pulled the notice from the post, and looked at it for a moment, then folded it once and handed it to Walter. "That's it," he said. Walter took the paper, looked at it briefly, then set it aside on a nearby shelf like it was just another piece of scrap that no longer mattered. The second official stepped forward slightly. "What you've got here," he said, glancing around the shed, "it's not what we thought it was. Walter didn't respond. He didn't need to, because everyone standing there already understood. What they had tried to remove was the only thing that had kept them going. The officials turned, walked back toward their truck, and drove off without another word. And just like that, the problem was gone. No fine, no enforcement, no deadline. Only silence. Then slowly, quietly, things started moving again. A man stepped forward with a broken part in his hand. Walter picked it up, examined it, nodded once. "Let's see what we can do." No celebration, no applause, just work. Because in the end, Walter Hayes hadn't won by arguing. He hadn't won by proving anyone wrong. He had won by being the only one who could keep things working when everything else stopped.
In the weeks that followed, things slowly returned to normal. The dealer reopened, shipments resumed, parts started arriving again. And just like that, the urgency faded. Machines were repaired the usual way, orders were placed like before, schedules stabilized. But something in Redfield County had changed. People still drove past Walter Hayes' property, but they didn't slow down to judge anymore. They slowed down to look, not at a mess, at a system they hadn't understood. The shed stayed exactly where it had always been. Nothing was torn down, nothing cleared out. If anything, it grew. A few shelves reorganized, a few new tools added, not for appearance, for use. And every now and then, when something didn't arrive on time or didn't exist anymore, someone would turn off the main road, drive up that familiar path, and knock on Walter's door. He never asked what they had said about him before. He never reminded them of the notice. He just listened, nodded once, and stepped back into the shed. Because to Walter Hayes, it had never been about proving anyone wrong. It had always been about one simple thing: keeping what still worked for the day nothing else did.